Have you ever seen the rental market as bad as this?
Nowhere near close to this. I had one of my properties personally. It was previously rented for $1,200 a week. The property sat empty for 4 months while I tried to get tenants. In the end, I took tenants at half the rent that I was getting last year.
Welcome to the Lowe Down. I'm here again with my good friend Adam, and today we're going to talk about really about tenancy laws, about the rental market in Wellington and how it's influenced by supply and demand, and also by the regulations the government puts in place. So, would there be a reasonable summary, Adam?
I think anything you say would be a reasonable summary because to a certain degree we're making it up as we go, aren't we?
Always.
But this is an interesting topic, and man, has the tenancy and the rental market kind of landscape, I think especially in Wellington, perhaps more so than the rest of the country, but across the country as well, but especially in Wellington, it has been a real roller coaster ride. There's been so much change. It's been kind of hard to keep up with everything. And it's swung, even in the last, say, 5 years, where we've had a huge amount of change on the legislative front, firstly with the previous government really swinging in favour of the tenants, and then more recently perhaps returning a little bit back towards the landlords or the property owners, but also an enormous change in the whole balance of supply and demand. So we've gone from a market that's been very, very tough for tenants, where they had to really compete hard, rents going up, hard to get a tenant.
That was the post-COVID time.
Yeah. Hard to get a rental, back to completely the opposite, where landlords, even in the face of what you'd have to argue has been overall declining levels of overall supply of rental property because of these changes, making it so much tougher for property owners. The balance of supply and demand has swung massively aggressively in favour of tenants, so it's become a real renters market.
Adam, and how long have you been investing in real estate for?
Well, I bought my first property in 1998, which was not a home; it was an investment property. Yep.
So we're talking 26 years,
27 years. Yep.
Have you ever seen the rental market as bad as this?
Nowhere near close to this. I mean, I've seen it really swing from being in owners' favour to being in tenants' favour. Nowhere near as aggressively as this, though.
Yeah.
This has been
decimated.
Phenomenal.
Absolutely decimated. Yeah.
Phenomenal. I mean, I had one of my properties personally, where the rent came, the tenants left. It was previously rented for $1,200 a week. The property sat empty for 4 months while I tried to get tenants. In the end, I took tenants at half the rent that I was getting last year. So,
and obviously, when I say decimate and we talk about this decline, we're talking from a landlord's perspective or from a owner's perspective, because that's typically our world where we deal with selling properties for owners and investing and stuff. But also the flip side of that is it's a great thing for tenants right now. Like
incredible opportunity in the last 12 months for tenants.
Get great deals,
far better proproperties.
Yeah. I mean,
lower rents.
How many rents have we seen slashed by three? Like a $900 rent going down to sort of $600 or $700 a week. It's just across the board, right? Like
commonplace. I mean, I don't know the exact data, but I think the average rent in Wellington has gone down by over 10% in the last 12 months.
And that would be way undercooking like the reality for many landlords in terms of what they've to get it rented, like what they've had to do, right?
Yeah, because the overall whole portfolio of properties that are rented, of course, the average rent across everything moves very slowly. It's the ones at the margins that become vacant and have to get rented. If they reduce by 30%, then that will produce an average rent reduction far, far, far less than 30%. Yeah. So a reduction of 10%, not only is it not increasing, but it's not even staying flat. It's going backwards by a considerable margin.
So an overall portfolio of rental properties across the whole of Wellington, a drop of 10% might mean that someone renting right now in this market may be dropping by 30 or 35% just to get rented in this market.
Yeah, it depends on the nature of the property. It's like everything, it depends on the location, the quality and the configuration and so on. So generally smaller places have fared better. So your typical one-bedroom apartment in the city or the city fringe that hasn't suffered nearly as much. It's been, in particular, it seems to have been the student rentals that have really suffered far more than anything else. And by which I mean city fringe, Kelburn, Mount Cook, Newtown, Aro Valley, places close to the university with lots of bedrooms. So this is really targeting groups of students or young professionals.
The worst hit.
5 bedrooms, 6 bedrooms, 7 bedrooms, small living areas.
But Wellington's full of those, right? I mean,
a
classic Wellington rental property is like that.
That's right.
So when we first started chatting, you just mentioned the tax changes and the government regulation changes. If we rewind and we think about, we sort of bring the listeners, I suppose, on the journey of like how we got to where we are now. If we start with the Labor government being in, we had COVID, there was all of the craziness, both in the real estate market, wider real estate market, but also in the rental market, hard to get a rental. That was the world back then. What regulations?
And house prices going up.
Yes.
Faster than rents were going up.
Yes.
So then the main, of course, even before that, healthy homes was coming in and all that sort of stuff, which is all good, making sure there were minimum standards of quality in terms of healthy, clean, dry, warm properties.
So good changes?
Overall good changes. Obviously there's a cost.
Everything is a trade-off.
There's a cost to everything, so it didn't come for free. And there are situations where, I'm selling a property at the moment, which is like a 2-bedroom apartment, and to comply with healthy homes, it's got this ridiculous heater on the wall. A, it's not required. B, it's completely ugly.
Using it.
It won't be being used, but it had to be put in. It's detrimental to the property. But I suppose with any of these changes, it's a one size fits all. So
net benefit,
but there are exceptions, I suppose. But then the major change that came in, which was, at least according to the PR lines of the government, was designed to assist first home buyers by reducing the competition they were facing from investors. So they were basically slamming investors by eliminating the ability of investors to claim mortgage interest as a viable tax-deductible expense. Now, of course, typically for the property investor, your mortgage interest is your biggest business expense. And Economics and Accounting 101 says profit equals income minus expenses. And what do you get taxed on? You get taxed on your profit. And so the government basically said, well, we're not only going to tax you on that profit, but we're also going to tax you on profit you didn't make, because we're not allowing you to deduct it by the amount of interest that you're paying. So that really that took a business that is already not very good on cash flow, because residential real estate is a poor
it's a low return business.
It's a poor cash flow producing business. And it reduced it even more. So, your typical property investor who is topping up properties in the first 5 or 10 years of owning it, and that change means you're pretty much topping up anything which has almost got anything but a negligible amount of debt on it. So that really discouraged, as at that point there, which I think was March 2021, if I recall correctly. From then on, basically, property investors just exited the market overall as buyers.
Yeah, and that's a rational response. It was
Totally.
The Healthy Homes Act, good net benefit.
Yeah.
That was absolutely crazy, right? Like the changing the economics like that.
Yeah.
It really mucks with the market. You end up with potentially creating long-term supply issues when you. It's not too far off rent controls, isn't it? Maybe it's not quite as bad as that, but.
I don't know whether it's not as bad as that or not, but certainly, for a start, it's completely out of left field. What business person would have expected a change like that?
Makes no sense.
It's insane, and so now a lot of people are actually distrustful of the government and thinking, well, if we get a change of government next year or in 4 years' time, what might they do? Who knows? Brace for impact.
Yeah, because they pulled the rug under a lot of people
so it basically undermines the future stability, and therefore it leaves people being completely very, very cautious about investing in this sector. And of course, some people would think that's a good thing, but overall, my personal view is that's a bad thing, because we do need rental properties to be supplied to tenants, and if we're suppressing investors' propensity to buy these things, well, what difference is that going to make to rent? It isn't going to bring it down.
No, that's right.
It's going to take it. It's going to push it up. Now, ironically, we haven't seen that happen in the last 12 months. We've had like we've been talking about, we have the softest rental market. How can that happen in the face of these extraordinary discouraging drivers, I suppose, to discourage investors from buying more? gosh, maybe it would have been even worse if investors had continued to purchase more and more rental properties. Maybe the market would have been even softer. But of course, these are short-term market changes, and I think the soft market we've been in the last year or so is really a result of the extreme economic slowdown that we've seen.
Cost of living.
Yeah, well, two main drivers. One is we've had a bunch of public servants lose their jobs in Wellington, so that's a lot of people exiting. The potential rental pool, because a lot of these people who are not permanently living here, they're transient, they rent places. And the other big area is, as we talked about before, is the student market, because the university student numbers have really softened since COVID.
This is very specific to Wellington, though, isn't it?
Yeah,
those two issues.
True.
So, but it has been a nationwide thing, which suggests, I know it's been worse in Wellington, which would be because of those variables. But why then? What are the variables that are driving it across the whole country?
Well, I think when you have an economic slowdown and everyone's budgets are getting squeezed, they're getting crushed. Wherever there is an opportunity not to take that extra rental, not to buy that extra house, or not to move and buy and get into your first house or upgrade or whatever, people will try. So, for example, if you think about it, when a group of tenants or a family or a couple or whatever are looking to rent a property or move, they're not doing this for fun. It is life changes or life events that are driving these moves, right? So if I think about it, when I was back in 2010 was during the GFC, and I separated at the time, and we went from one household to one household because I didn't go out and get another rental because I was being crushed during the GFC, So you get all these people who would otherwise be going to get a rental property because we're talking about the rental market. The same is true in the housing market and the sales market, but in the rental market, they would otherwise go and get a rental property, but they're getting crushed, they're getting squeezed, they're terrified of their budgets, not surviving or not coping, and so they go and crash on Auntie Agnes's couch, or they go and live in their cousin's garage, or they
they stay in the student flat
that
they're in, instead of shacking up with a girlfriend and getting their own more home, upsizing into something
exactly. So the group of six might stay in that property for longer because it's cheaper than breaking into 3 household units with 1 to 2 bedrooms each. So all of these things just basically go on hold.
So there's less liquidity in the market because there's less people moving.
So fundamentally the economics haven't changed. It's a temporary blip, isn't it? So, I mean, how many spare rooms are there around the country? How many spare rumpus rooms are there? There's a bunch of a capacity in that regard. And so you might see, if we could do a census every 12 months, you'd see the number of people per household temporarily going up as a temporary response to this real slowdown in this what everyone's calling the cost of living crisis.
Easy to underestimate, how visceral this is for young people, particularly who might be on much lower incomes than people our age, who are looking at just incredible inflation over the last 5 years, and obviously doing their best to keep up with the wage growth that's been going on as well. Like just finding ways to save is for people, for young people is obviously
that's right.
If you have, the point I'm making is housing such a big part of your cost, right?
Yes.
So if you can minimize,
if you can delay that expense or reduce that expense for a year, or 2 years or 3 years, while you cope throughout this trough, and so what does it look like coming out the other side?
Yeah. Well,
it means there's a bunch of catch-up.
Yeah. Well, I think Wellington has been, I think it's really fascinating that Wellington has had all of that going on, as well as job insecurity, massive layoffs, which I think has disproportionately affected people who don't own houses. I think that would be my guess, that the government cuts have been significantly weighted towards, the people that don't own houses within the government. That's a speculation of mine, but because I feel like it hasn't affected the property market as the sale market as much as it's affected the rental market, the job cuts. I think it's disproportionately affected the rental market.
Right.
I mean, volumes have been coming back in the real estate sales market for 3 years, right? While all this has been
you're
going
certainly
on.
Not suggesting that the sales market hasn't been impacted. I mean, we've seen the price drops like we've never seen before.
Yeah, but what I mean is that the government cuts specifically I think, one portion of that, but volumes are coming back into that market, whereas they're not coming back into the rental market.
I mean, we are seeing available rentals. A few months ago, it was up in Wellington up around 1,750, and typically it's under 1,000. So we had like
Almost
twice
double.
the supply,
Amazing, yeah.
something like that, twice the supply
crazy,
that we normally would have. And now, well, last time I checked, maybe a week ago, it was around 1,450.
It's come back a little
So
bit.
it's come back
Yeah,
quite a lot.
that's actually reasonable, yeah.
Yeah, that's quite a lot.
Yeah.
So it is changing, but yeah.
Yeah, so obviously those two variables will be big, and we know that the other thing is that the universities were down over the last few years, right? And and there is talk that may change next year.
Yes, so the numbers I understand is from 21 to 23, 2021 to 2023, Victoria University, which typically, I don't know Massey's numbers, but I assume it's comparable or similar-ish trend. Ordinarily, they would grow their numbers a little bit every year. And from 2021 to 23, they dropped by about 15%. That's a big drop, of course. And then 23 to 24, they were level. 24 to 25 this year, we've seen a small increase. I think it's something like 500 students. And so obviously the ship has been turned around and they're heading back in the same direction again. A few other points on that. About a month or so ago, maybe 6 weeks, Victoria University had their open day. This year, the open day was attended by 41% more people exploring coming to Vic next year than last year. So that's a big increase in what I would assume will be first-year students next year. And this year, the halls are largely full now, whereas for the last 4 years or so, they've been relatively empty. They've had spare capacity in the halls, so the students have been able to stay in there for longer. They haven't been exiting and coming out into the private rental market. And I understand that the halls next year are 100% booked again. So for the first time in about 5 years, you're going to see a lot of students coming out of those halls again and into the private rental market. So my prediction personally is that the rental market will strengthen quite a lot this summer. Will it be back to previous levels of strength? I doubt it that quickly, but it will be a significant improvement compared to last year.
Adam, you made some interesting points before we started talking today about the differences between the regulations here. Because there's a couple of things on the cards that didn't end up happening, weren't there? Like there was talk about regulating the property management industry, which is an interesting.
They're still talking about that.
Still talking about that.
Yeah.
Because the last thing I remember reading was that had got shoved aside, but you obviously had some more up to date information.
Yeah, you might be right, but as far as I'm aware, I understood it was still on the agenda at least.
Interesting.
Yep.
And then there was obviously certain things come up all the time comparing us to like Europe, for example, and how the sort of, I suppose, the tenant-landlord relationship's quite different over there, and it's largely to do with how it's regulated. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, sure. So you're referring to, I recall, maybe it was 5 years ago, when there was this whole discussion around how unfair the whole rental landscape is for tenants, and there was various groups saying we want greater security of tenure for instead of being 12-month as the norm. We want the ability to have 5-year terms or 10-year leases on properties and that sort of thing, and they were comparing it to the much more established markets over in continental Europe, and at the time I just remember thinking, well, they're only talking about one element of the rules over in Europe, and that is the length that you can secure a tenancy for. What they completely omitted were all the other the differences in the responsibilities of the tenants versus the landlords, and a key difference is the amount of fit out and the amount of capital outlay that is required for tenants in a lot of the markets in Europe. So, for example, in Germany and Holland, I think it is in particular, yes, you can rent a property for, say, 10 years, but what you're renting a lot of the time is actually just a shell. And by a shell, I mean the tenant becomes responsible for the carpet, the vinyl, the painting, the light fittings, the window dressings, and sometimes even the kitchen. Now, no tenant in this country would expect to have to paint the property, let alone put in the light fittings or the kitchens.
When they move in. But you can take a longer tenure, so there's a trade-off there, right?
Correct.
So
you can take a longer
10 years.
Yeah, that's right.
And no one can kick me out. And, what about rent?
But how much does it cost to fit that out?
Yeah, I know.
50,000, 80,000.
So you got to amortize that over the length.
Yeah. And so my sister, for example, she's in Denmark, and she's rented a place just for for less than a year, and she's just moved to a place that's more suitable for her. And as part of her exiting the property, she had to sand the floors and polish them and repaint it. She's been there less than a year. Now, if anyone was suggesting that should happen here in New Zealand, I don't think many tenants would be too pleased about that. So I just thought that the argument back then was really not balanced. And it's, yes, if we went more like Europe, it would mean that you could have much, much greater security of tenure. But gee, if it's like the models over there, it comes with much greater responsibilities falling on the part of the tenants. And the aspect of it is bonds. Over here, the maximum bond you can hold is 4 weeks. Over there are places where you can hold up to 3 months worth of rent. So that's a large amount of money.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and so and if you were going back to the start of the conversation, we were talking about the difference between the regulations and the effect that's had on the market and the change in supply and demand, in terms of just the market forces that were driving, that change. What impact do you think these regulations have had that are going to make changes over the sort of longer term?
Yeah, so at the time, for example, the biggest change being the loss of interest tax deductibility. At the time, all of the owners, the property investors were screaming that we will sell, this will reduce the supply, that will just push rents up. And here we are 5 years later. It's been reversed, but only reasonably recently. So here we are 5 years later, and rents have actually softened. It's been the opposite of what was predicted. Does that mean that back then those people, making those claims were wrong? I think ultimately no. But what we've seen in the last 12 months has just been a result of general economic slowdown. Yeah. As opposed to the long term, which is where the longer term fundamentals of the supply and demand balances. So ultimately,
that's a great point. And that what that means, if we were to just forecast out for a bit and make some some speculations. Yeah. Wouldn't you say there's a chance that at some point, fairly strong chance that at some point when all these things reverse, we're going to end up in a situation where the tenants are screaming again.
Totally. Because
actually rents are going to have a skyrocketing moment potentially because of undersupply. Because now, all of the, the economic situation will change, right? It's a cycle. We know that. I mean, cost of money gets cheaper. All of the over leverage starts to, eventually that washes through, economic GDP growth, population growth, and suddenly there's no supply of rental properties because people have been washed out of the market because we know there's no investors out there buying right now.
Very few.
It's incredible how, I've never seen it.
I've seen them come back. They are coming back. I've sold a few investment properties lately and they're definitely coming back, but nowhere near to the degree that they were.
I would argue buying. those are the well-capitalized, sophisticated investors that are seeing opportunity and they're the first people to come in. But that's a very small portion. Part of the reason is also because a lot of the investors are over-leveraged, right? A lot of them can't take action right now, even if they wanted to.
Well, the people who are over-leveraged, they're selling because they've been crushed.
Yeah.
And that's a reminder that, debt does equal risk.
So I'd say right now we still have an excess of people selling over buying
definitely.
In the rental market.
There is an increase in investors coming into the market to purchase, and I've actually seen some first-time investors coming into the market. So I'm not seeing anyone in the middle. I'm seeing the really well-capitalized people who've got 10, 20, 30, and people who are just looking to make their first foray into it. And they're smart because they're buying absolutely, at the bottom.
But I think, so I get that point. But what I'm getting at is that the fact that we have an excess of supply over demand, it means that we are setting ourselves up for a problem down the road.
100%.
And the issue is that, right now it might be great for tenants. And in fact, if we wrap up today's podcast with, that outlook is not great for tenants. So tenants should take advantage of now.
They absolutely should.
Don't stay in your student rental. Go and take that upsize to something better right now while rents are cheap and lock in the
if you can get a 3-year agreement.
Yeah.
Get a 3-year. We'll rent it now if you don't put the rent up for 3 years. This is temporary, regardless of where we are in any economic cycle. It is temporary. So 100% I agree. We've had overall supply levels are more constrained now than they would have been if these changes had not been made. The demand is well down and very suppressed, which is what is giving us these very, very soft market conditions, very good for tenants, very bad for owners. But when economic good times start coming back, and there's no question they will, the amount of supply is very inelastic.
Yeah.
It doesn't change quickly,
yeah,
right?
100%.
And so when that demand comes back,
Yeah.
I cannot see any other outcome other than rents are going to absolutely skyrocket.
Yeah.
And I know that's an awful thing for a lot of people to think about, but I can't see any outcome. Now, of course, that's only my prediction. I've been wrong many, many times before. But, that's what I can see.
Yeah, no, I agree with that entirely. Adam, awesome as usual.
Yep.
Appreciate your
Very good.
insights.
Thanks.
That was Lowe Down. Thanks so much for tuning in. Please like and subscribe, and Adam and I will be back in to do it next week. Thank you.
See you next time.